Hi, my name's Tara Wood and I'm the Managing Director at Kingswood Partnership Financial Planning Limited.
Hi, I'm Daniel Axelrod. I'm the Estate Planning Manager at Kingswood Partnership.
Welcome to episode 1 at Kingswood Editions. So Daniel, just talk to me about why it's so important that everybody needs to consider making a will.
I think because, one, everybody's so different. I say to everybody, no two families are the same, so no two wills should ever be the same.
Yeah.
And people seem to think that if they don't make a will, then that means they've not said what they want to happen. Well, actually, the government tell you what happened if you've not made a will. So you either go with a government will that's templated by somebody that wrote the rules 200 years ago and didn't have sort of any knowledge on your family, your loved ones, or what you wanted, or you do it yourself and tell everybody exactly what you want.
And what's different with us compared to other estate planning companies out there? What will we do to help people make a will?
Well, I think most importantly, we'll hold their hand start to finish. We don't expect it to be a 5-minute transaction. And one of our big ethoses is we don't charge hourly rates because we don't want somebody to feel that they're making their decisions against the clock. Because I think what does put a lot of people off is not knowing where to start and then wondering how much that's going to cost them to get things processed. Whereas with us, we'll help them start to finish. We'll always sort of come up with a solution that is tailor-made to that individual circumstances. Sometimes that can be a really easy, simple thing. Sometimes that needs real thorough estate planning. But speaking to somebody who knows what they're doing is going to make your decisions easier rather than sort of you guessing yourself and crossing your fingers hoping you get it right.
And I know I say this with a smile on my face, but we're never shocked with what we hear from different clients. You know, we hear all sorts of scenarios. Nothing really phases you, does it?
No, not at all, because I think the reality is you will probably do well to come up with a scenario that we've not seen before. We've both been in the industry now for sort of over 15 years, and in that time dealt with so many people from so many different backgrounds, and no two circumstances ever the same. And as I say to a lot of people, what you might think's peculiar, I think's completely straightforward, and vice versa. That's why we've got the approach we've got, so anybody can walk in and feel comfortable and talk to us about what their circumstances require.
We had a scenario just recently where a client had remarried. They'd got a child in the new marriage, but they'd got 2 previous children.
Yeah.
And he felt quite embarrassed informing us that he only wanted to leave the child that they'd had in the second marriage and not the eldest 2. How do we deal with that scenario?
Well, I think the biggest thing with anything is having an open and honest conversation about why you want to do what you want to do and achieve what you want to achieve. There's no right or wrong, but there is an obligation on anybody to put down what they want to happen. Mm-hmm. Burying your head in the sand is never the solution. Mm-hmm. So when you want to achieve something, tell us about it so we can obviously help you get to that point. Where people do want to exclude children, and it's becoming more and more common, don't always think it's a bad thing. I've recently dealt with a client that wanted their children to inherit over others because they'd made substantial gifts to one child during their lifetime.
Yeah.
And they felt it was only right that the child who'd had a lot more support during their life didn't get as much estate when they pass away. Now, if you put in a will, 50% here, 20% there, and 30% there, it's a very cold document. That's where a lot of what we do is about the reasoning as to why they've put what they've put in the will, making it crystal clear for their loved ones, their reasoning behind their wishes.
Yeah, and we offer a will clarity statement, don't we, that's a separate document alongside the will, which is almost backing up the reasons why they made the decisions that they did, because we have come across scenarios where, you know, there's been relationship breakdowns and they haven't spoken to children for over 20 years. And I guess all of that puts reasoning within that document, which if that ever got questioned in the future, that document's there rather than it just being written in a will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a will isn't the why, the will is the what. So when you essentially write a will, you're saying what is going to happen, but that doesn't explain anything. That doesn't sort of say why you've got to the decisions you've got to, and that's where a will clarity statement's of real importance. A client I helped previously was in a similar scenario. had a child from his latest relationship and had 2 children from his first marriage. One of the things he did was give 50% to his youngest child and 25% to the older siblings. The reasoning behind that was the older siblings were going to inherit off their mum, which had obviously been passed a large part of the estate following the divorce. So he wanted to make sure his youngest son got more out of the current estate, knowing the other 2 were going to get more anyway.
Yeah.
Now, on a will, it just says 25%, 25%, 50%. The will clarity statement explained exactly why that client had done what they'd done.
Yeah.
And the sons actually understood why their little brother was getting more than them. They probably didn't like it at first glance, but having obviously been able to read and understand why their dad had done what they'd done, it gave them the comfort that he'd actually thought about it and thought about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real powerful document, and it's a separate document to the will. It doesn't need to be, that's not made public.
No.
Obviously, the will's made public. That document's only used if it needs to be.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's giving that reassurance to people, but also, most importantly, from the client, putting the personality into a will, because most people who've ever read a legal document don't understand it, don't fully understand what each part means, and then just think, well, I don't get it, so that's all right, I'll move on. The will clarity statement's a real key point of somebody being able to say, this is why I've done what I've done, both good and bad, essentially, and that's what we're there to help and steer somebody understand, because you see these cheap templated wills online, you're not going to get that. It's names, addresses, sign here, and then obviously the family are left wondering why X got what they got, and that's what we can obviously help and protect for people.
Yeah, and I think there's a real positive of what we do at Kingswood that comes as standard as part of our will package.
Yeah.
And
We've never charged for one will clarity statement, which is sort of why we do what we do, because we're big believers in obviously the job being done right first time.
Absolutely. And I'm right with saying that the client signs that document and the consultant signs
Absolutely.
that document.
Yeah.
So you are both agreeing to what's written in that document, and you're both signing to say that's how the meeting took place. That's exactly what was discussed, and they're my reasons why.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big thing is who was actually at the meeting, because unfortunately people only squabble when the person who actually wrote the will has passed away. So you've not got that person's voice telling you exactly what I said, when I said it, who was there when I said it. And families, wherever they sort of come from all over the world, have the same sort of trials and tribulations. Where money's involved, people have hidden agendas. And what a will clarity statement's doing is making it crystal clear who was present when you wrote your will. Were you being coerced? Were you being forced to do something you didn't want to do? Obviously, something we are really proud of at Kingswood is we're not afraid to walk away from business. We obviously are very comfortable that every will we've ever written was written by somebody who knew what they were doing. I had a situation only last week where I had to say no because I wasn't comfortable that the client actually knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of our business is, yes, we want to help people, but only when they know what they're doing. We'll never obviously write a will for somebody that was unsure. And that will clarity is a huge part of that planning. So if a family member did come out of the woodwork and said, Mum was forced to do this, Dad was forced to do that, it makes it crystal clear that wasn't the case. And if there was anybody present at the meeting, we're comfortable that they're not coercing the client in any way, because if they are, we just simply won't continue.
Yeah, and I'm just going to touch on, in terms of if clients can't see to read the documents, there's obviously provisions that we can put in terms of what happens in those scenarios.
Yeah.
So if you can't read documents now, because you're maybe... you've got issues with your site or it's deteriorating, there's obviously things that we can add it within that document to assist people.
Absolutely. And where somebody can't read their will due to a sight impairment, as an example, we would write in the will that somebody's going to read the will to them. We'd expect that person to be present and then sign to say they've done that.
Yeah.
So again, we're comfortable that the client knows what's been said to them and what's been read ultimately. And again, where people do have vulnerabilities, it's important they're not taken advantage of, because sadly there are plenty of people that do suffer from hearing loss, sight loss, whatever that may be, and sort of family members or friends feel they can take advantage of. And that's a real key part of any estate planning, even more so where there is a vulnerability.
And I think we just want our clients to be really open and honest with us. We're not there to judge any scenario. I think we've said, previously that, no situation will surprise us, but honesty is really key, because one thing for sure is we are going to use a will at some point.
Yep.
The question is when.
Absolutely.
So this is arguably one of the most important documents that you'll ever write. Therefore, it's got to be done correctly.
Yeah.
You've got to feel that you can trust the people that you work with. You've got to feel comfortable that that you are documenting everything that you want to happen to ensure that you are getting exactly what you want written.
There's no second chances with will writing. Nobody at the end says, is everybody happy with that, so we can all move on. The will states what's going to happen. So it's really important. One, you get that right, but two, someone is there to hold your hand through that process. Because if you asked most people what would you want to happen if they passed away today, they would probably know. But if you asked anybody, have you put it in writing, less than 30% actually have. So if you've not put it down in writing, how's somebody to know what you wanted, who you wanted to deal with things, was the special provisions you wanted to make within the will? Because very few wills we write are your typical 2.4 family where everything goes left, right and 50-50. Nearly every will has got a special request in it. Well, that special request is special to that individual and will be left out if it's not put down in paper.
Yeah, and I think the one thing for me is people still put off writing a will, and I don't know why. You're definitely going to need a will. The question is when. But why do you still think people are putting off writing a will?
I think there's, of course, a naivety to it sometimes, and people perhaps don't like to hear that, but tomorrow's not a given. And unfortunately, 70% of our clients tend to pick up the phone when something's gone wrong close to home, whether that's a family member, whether that's a friend. We've had so many cases of family members dying under the age of 50. We probably hear as many as them as we do people who pass away over 80. And you're never too young to write a will. If you're in your 20s and your 30s, you've probably got young children. And if you've got young children, you've got a responsibility to put provisions in place of what would happen to them children if you passed. And if you're in your later years, then the reality is you've probably built up assets that you want to pass down to loved ones and ensure they go to the right people. You can be for sure you're never going to write your will too early. If you write it and don't need it for 30 years, great. It's probably the best value for money thing you ever did, but you did it and you'll never not have a will again.
I guess the first step is always making the instruction to write a will. However, clients do make that first step, but still don't have that rush or urgency to sign the will. So they've taken the first step, but on occasions, we've had scenarios where they've done the hard work in terms of started the process, but then not completed that process. Tell me of a scenario that I think's recently happened within our offices that could have cost them and their family a lot more money in taxes.
Yeah, so we've had a client that have done an instruction with us, and the way our instruction process works is we will go through what we think's best advice for the client and then send them a summary of their instructions so they can review it and make sure it's what they want to do. Essentially, we'd never produce a will for somebody in 5 minutes and say sign it. So a lot of what our process is checking it and making sure that's exactly what you want to happen. The downside of that is it gives people that time to put things off because it feels less real until you open it, until you check it. And we had a client contact us to explain that their partner had been rushed into hospital, been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and had been given months to live.
Yeah.
Which is the worst thing any family can go through. The backstory to this client was they were unmarried partners and co-owned property in the south, which would have created huge tax complications if they didn't get their affairs in order. And as you can imagine, the client, wanting to be by a partner's side, is frantically ringing us because they now want their will. Now, thankfully, we can get things obviously finalised for them because we've done the instruction process. And if that client signs that will before they pass away, it will probably save the estate north of £150,000 in inheritance tax. If they hadn't signed that will and they just put it to the side, then the reality is the client, their family, one, are in an already difficult situation on having suddenly dealt with the loss of a loved one, with the added problem of the taxes and problems caused with unmarried partners passing away and not putting plans in place.
And I guess without clients talking to us or asking the question or picking up the phone to us, and we always make ourselves available for that, I think one thing that we should be extremely proud of at Kingswood is the ongoing service side, because we don't see clients just writing a will today and then we forget about it, forget about that client. We don't want them to just pop it in a drawer and forget about it. We're all about keeping that will updated. So we will contact clients on a yearly basis. Yep. That could be a 2-minute conversation, or it could be a longer conversation booked in with the original consultant. Yeah. So there's that familiarity that's been carried on and about that personal service. But clients, sometimes situations do change.
Yeah.
People come in your life, people leave your life. And it's important that that will document reflects their current situation. And we understand that changes need to be made.
Absolutely.
But also personal finances can change. And, inheritance can, they could have been awarded inheritance. Lots of circumstances can change, over the years.
And I think a lot of it is that's where our service outshines a lot of others. It's that holding the hand, but never letting go. Because for a lot of people, they do see a will as a transactional document. And I'm sure there'll be many viewers that says, well, it doesn't matter. I wrote a will 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And that will is probably sat in a drawer somewhere, potentially in a house you moved out of 20 years ago. And we've all left things behind when we move. And it's only that light bulb moment when something happens and somebody goes, where is my will? Where did I put it? What did I actually put in the will? I think if you asked most people who wrote their will 30 years ago, does it still show what they want it to? It would be a no. The reality is they probably made a will when children were a lot younger, which was right at the time, and they were putting in place things for guardians and young children. But the children are probably in their 30s and 40s now, and their executors have potentially passed or now in their 70s and 80s. And do you really want to put that burden on somebody who's probably in a vulnerable situation themselves? So I think keeping your will up to date is as important of actually writing a will, because an outdated will is not much better than no will at all.
Yeah. And I think for us, and I think it's important to get this over to our clients, is what do we do at Kingswood different to manage the aftercare and manage the contact going forward with that client?
I think the big thing we do differently is we don't treat a client as if they know everything. Yeah. We explain what's included, what we do, what they need to consider. I come back to this holding hand process because that is what it is our job to do. But also we don't talk down to people and expect them to know everything.
It is all about that warmth for our clients. Yeah. No question is a silly question. No scenario is going to be an unheard scenario. And ultimately, we want to make sure that that client gets everything that they want to achieve.
Yeah.
And we'll go that extra mile.